Hidden deep in the heart of the Rocky Mountains lies a prison so secretive, so secure, it's been called the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place where inmates disappear into concrete boxes and sometimes never come out the same again. This is ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in the United States, a facility built not just to contain the nation's most dangerous men, but to erase their very sense of self. Imagine spending 23 hours a day locked inside a cell barely bigger than your bathroom. No human touch, no sunlight on your skin, no voice except your own echoing off concrete walls. For many, this isn't punishment. It's psychological annihilation, and for some, it's worse than death. But here's the question nobody asks. Who designed this hell? Who were the architects of extreme solitary confinement? Was ADX Florence built for safety or control? And what happens to the human mind when it's pushed to the edge of total isolation? Before we go inside, hit that like, share, and subscribe button, because what you're about to see isn't just a prison story. It's a journey into the dark psychology of control, a place where the U.S. government redefined the meaning of punishment itself, the birth of a modern hell. It all began in the 1980s, an era of chaos in American prisons. Riots erupted across the country. Inmates took over entire facilities, and guards were being killed in record numbers. The federal system was reaching a breaking point. The worst of the worst, terrorists, cartel bosses, mob hitmen, and violent gang leaders, were out of control, even behind bars. The government needed a solution, a new kind of facility, not just a prison, but a weapon, something that could break a man without laying a finger on him. And so, in 1989, deep in Florence, Colorado, plans began for a fortress unlike anything ever built before. The design of despair. Every inch of ADX Florence was designed with a single purpose: complete control. From the outside, it looks like any other prison: concrete walls, towers, razor wire. But inside, it's a labyrinth of isolation. No blind spots, no corners unmonitored, no chance to connect. Cells are constructed from reinforced concrete. Windows are just 4 inches wide, angled upward. So inmates can see only the sky, never the horizon. Even the airflow, lighting, and acoustics were engineered to reduce any sensory stimulation. You don't hear voices. You don't see movement. You simply exist. Architects called it a marvel of security. Psychologists called it a machine for breaking minds. Inside the box. Inside ADX, inmates spend 23 hours a day inside an 8 by 10-foot cell. They eat alone, exercise alone. Even their showers, controlled remotely by guards behind bulletproof glass, are taken in isolation. The cell doors are solid steel, with small slots for food trays and shackles. There are no bars to look through, no voices from neighboring cells, just silence. For 1 hour a day, inmates are allowed into a recreation cage, a concrete pen the size of a dog kennel. Some call it the cage under the sky. Others call it the box inside the box. The ghosts who live there. The residents of ADX are infamous, each one a symbol of terror, betrayal, or violence. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, who waged war on modern technology. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. Robert Hansen, the FBI agent who sold secrets to the Russians. And Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the drug lord who tunneled his way out of Mexican prisons, but couldn't tunnel out of this one. Here, their names don't matter. Their reputations vanish. They become numbers, ghosts locked in concrete. And as the years pass, some begin to lose touch with reality itself. Reports speak of men talking to themselves for hours. Others smear messages on their cell walls, desperate for anyone to read them. A few simply stop speaking altogether. Even prison guards admit it's a place that eats at your soul. The system's dark genius. Who built this place and why? It wasn't just engineers and security experts. It was a collaboration between the Federal Bureau of Prisons, military psychologists, and behavioral scientists. They studied the effects of sensory deprivation, behavioral control, and isolation-induced psychosis. Not prevent it, but to use it as a management tool. ADX wasn't a failure of humanity. It was a design of it. Behind every camera, every door, every flickering fluorescent light is a philosophy. If we control the environment, we control the man. But at what cost? The mind labyrinth. They call ADX Florence a control unit. But inside, control isn't just physical. It's psychological warfare. Every detail, every sensation, or lack of it, is designed to dismantle the human mind. Meals are slipped through a slot. No contact. Guards rarely speak unless necessary. The silence becomes deafening. And when sound does come, the metallic click of a door, a distant cough, it hits like thunder in a stormless sky. Some inmates count the seconds between noises just to prove time still exists. Psychological destruction by design. Former inmate. After a while, you start talking to the toilet. You flush, and the echo becomes your friend. It sounds like madness, but it's by design. Experts call it environmental deprivation. Stripping away every element of human interaction, sight, and sound until the brain begins to create its own reality. When the Bureau of Prisons built ADX, they consulted behavioral scientists who studied isolation effects on sensory perception. They knew the mind craves input, light, sound, touch, motion. Deprive it long enough, and hallucinations fill the void. Some inmates report hearing voices. Others claim to see shadows crawling along the walls. But there's no one there. There never is. Voices from the void. Court records and human rights reports describe scenes that border on the unreal. Men banging their heads against walls, screaming for hours. Others tearing at their flesh just to feel something. In 2012, a group of inmates filed a lawsuit, Cunningham versus Federal Bureau of Prisons, claiming that ADX Florence drove prisoners with mental illness to the brink of insanity. They described seeing men mutilate themselves with broken metal. One inmate sliced off his earlobe and mailed it to the warden. Another chewed through his own finger. The lawsuit alleged what insiders already knew. ADX wasn't just a prison. It was a psychological experiment hidden behind legal walls. The silent war within. But in a place like this, rebellion has no fire, no weapons, no riots. It happens quietly, in the mind. Inmates begin to construct imaginary worlds. Some create whole families they talk to. Others replay crimes, conversations, and regrets on an endless mental loop. The isolation doesn't just punish the guilty. It reshapes them. Former inmate. You start thinking maybe you deserve it. Maybe you really are a monster. Then one day you forget what your own voice sounds like. That's the moment ADX wins. When silence replaces guilt. And the walls start whispering louder than your own thoughts. Control is a philosophy. To understand ADX, you need to understand its creators. The architects, the wardens, the policymakers. They weren't sadists. They were believers. They believed that complete isolation was the only way to neutralize chaos, to stop prison gangs from running operations behind bars, to prevent another guard from dying in a riot. Inside Bureau of Prisons manuals, they called it environmental management, a clinical term hiding a cold truth. You can't rehabilitate what you no longer recognize as human. Testing the limits of human endurance. Psychologists have long studied what happens when humans are deprived of social contact. But ADX took those theories and built a monument to them. Prisoners describe days blending into nights, weeks into months. The only constant, the dim hum of air conditioning and the buzz of fluorescent lights that never truly go dark. Without clocks or conversation, time becomes liquid. Some inmates say they start dreaming while awake, blurring sleep and consciousness. Others forget the faces of their loved ones, forget their crimes, forget themselves. The warden's dilemma. For those who run ADX, the challenge is moral as much as operational. Wardens justify the system as necessary containment. They argue these men are too dangerous for normal prisons. Terrorists, traitors, cartel bosses, serial killers. They've killed inside other prisons. If not here, then where? But the system doesn't discriminate. Even low-level offenders or mentally ill inmates sometimes find themselves inside, placed in extreme isolation for years on end. And once you're inside the walls of ADX, getting out isn't easy. It's a place designed not just to imprison the body, but to outlast the mind. The human cost. One inmate wrote, I forget the sound of my mother's voice. Sometimes I think she never existed. Another said, "It's not the confinement that kills you. It's the silence." Some call it justice. Others call it psychological torture. But one truth remains. ADX Florence isn't just a prison built by architects of concrete and steel. It's a prison built by architects of despair. And yet, the blueprint didn't stop here. Because what was tested inside these walls, isolation, surveillance, control, soon became a model for prisons around the world. The export of isolation. When ADX Florence opened in 1994, it wasn't just a prison. It was a prototype, a model for the modern age of incarceration, where technology and psychology fuse to create the illusion of total order. Soon, that design philosophy began to spread far beyond Colorado's desert. In the years that followed, the world watched as the United States exported not only its wars, but its prisons. And deep within those systems lay the same architectural DNA, the blueprint of extreme solitary confinement. Chapter 13, The Global Footprint. After September 11th, America's war on terror reshaped detention forever. Facilities from Guantanamo Bay to secret black sites in Eastern Europe borrowed techniques first tested in the U.S. Supermax system. Windowless cells, constant surveillance, no-touch interactions, isolation dressed in the language of security. Inmates in Guantanamo's Camp 5 described conditions almost identical to ADX. 23-hour lockdowns, concrete boxes, fluorescent lighting, silence. Even guards admitted. It felt like we were running Florence overseas. SFX. Faint helicopter rotor fading into silence. Narrator. This wasn't coincidence. It was influence. The blueprint of control. In 2004, a memo surfaced describing environmental manipulation and isolation as behavioral leverage. Terms that sound clinical, but behind them lies an echo of ADX philosophy. The idea was simple, even elegant in its cruelty. If you strip a human of all connection, they become pliable. Compliance is born not from force, but from loneliness. At ADX, that concept was physical. Cell walls and iron doors. Abroad, it became psychological. Rooms without sound, sleep deprivation, invisible supervision. Different setting. Same architecture of the mind. The step-down Mirage. Inside ADX, there's one path to freedom, the step-down program. On paper, it's a system designed to reward good behavior. Follow the rules, complete the phases, and you can earn your way out of solitary. But the reality? It's a maze with no exit. The step-down program has 4 levels. Each step offers a little more freedom, more recreation time, maybe a phone call, maybe contact with another inmate. But progress isn't automatic. It's subjective. A guard's interpretation of your behavior, a psychologist's evaluation of your stability. Inmates describe it as a leash made of hope. You can move forward, but never too far. Never fast enough to forget who's holding the other end. The system that learns you. In recent years, ADX has evolved into something even more chilling, a smart prison. Every movement, every gesture, every vocal tone is recorded, analyzed, cataloged. Artificial intelligence flags behavioral anomalies. Software predicts agitation cycles. Inmates are no longer just watched, they're studied. It's no longer the guard's gaze that breaks you. It's the idea that the system itself knows you when you sleep, when you pace, when you finally start to crack. Imagine isolation so total that even your silence is monitored. Test subjects of the state. Officially, ADX is not an experiment, but unofficially, it has produced decades of data. Reports from prison psychologists document everything from hallucination frequency to emotional flattening. Each inmate becomes a living case study in what prolonged isolation does to the brain. MRI studies show that long-term solitary confinement can shrink parts of the brain responsible for empathy and memory. Neural pathways degrade. Impulse control collapses. Inmates who eventually leave ADX often describe being overwhelmed by crowds, light, and sound, symptoms of what psychologists call post-isolation trauma. It's not rehabilitation. It's reprogramming. When silence echoes back, what happens when an architect of control creates something even they can't undo? Even correctional officers have described hearing things. Not voices, but patterns. A rhythm of silence that fills the hallways, as if the building itself has learned to breathe. Some say the place feels alive, feeding on despair, on stillness, on time itself. Others say that's just the mind's way of coping. But spend long enough in Florence, and even the guards start counting the days like prisoners. The cost of perfection. Every perfect system hides a cost. For ADX Florence, that cost is invisible, paid not in blood, but in identity. Inmates leave with blank stares, broken rhythms, and a fear of open space. Their minds calibrated to 8 by 10 feet of existence. One former prisoner described his release as stepping out a television screen. Another said, the air felt too wide. Freedom, for them, was another kind of cage. The unspoken truth. ADX Florence was built to be escape-proof. But the real escape isn't physical. It's psychological, and almost no one makes it. Behind its flawless design lies a simple truth. You can lock a man away, but the ghosts of silence follow him forever. And somewhere beneath those mountains, in the quiet hum of the world's most secure prison, the architects still stand proud, not of their walls, but of the order they created, a place where chaos can't breathe. And humanity, perhaps, was the first casualty, the invisible ward. There's a side of ADX Florence that doesn't appear on the official blueprints, a part that isn't shown in the glossy security reports or Bureau of Prisons press tours. The invisible ward, a section where records blur, surveillance is constant, and the line between prisoner and subject quietly disappears. The men who vanished. ADX Florence was designed to house roughly 490 inmates, but over the years, there have been names that appeared in intake logs and never appeared again. No release dates, no transfers, no death certificates, just blank space. Most of these missing inmates weren't high-profile terrorists or mob bosses. They were men with mental illness, men whose breakdowns were too inconvenient to report, men who, according to lawsuits and whistleblowers, simply disappeared into administrative segregation permanently. They'd move them to different tiers, different numbers. You'd hear them screaming for a few days, then nothing. The paperwork would just stop. The silent suicides. Suicide in solitary isn't loud. It doesn't come with shouts or alarms. It comes quietly, in the moments between routine checks, in the endless silence that feels like eternity. Officially, ADX Florence records very few suicides. Unofficially, insiders tell a different story. Inmates use whatever they can, torn sheets, shoelaces, clothing. One prisoner, Jack Powers, tried to end his life multiple times, slicing, hanging, even chewing through his veins. After being held in isolation for over a decade, he survived. Barely, but he described ADX as a place built to destroy the human spirit. Between 1995 and 2010, internal reports revealed multiple unexplained deaths. The Bureau labeled them as medical complications. But former staff described them differently, men who gave up the behavioral programs. Buried within Bureau of Prisons records lies something called the Behavioral Management Protocol, a series of programs meant to modify inmate conduct through progressive isolation. Translated, if you resist, if you act out, shout, or even refuse orders, you're placed in deeper levels of solitary. Fewer privileges, less light, more silence. Each level is supposed to be temporary, but some inmates remain there for years. One former warden described it bluntly. It's not about punishment anymore. It's about conditioning. Conditioning obedience through deprivation until resistance itself feels pointless. The cell that breathes. ADX is designed to respond to its occupants. Sensors track movement, heat, even breath rate. Each cell's air system is independent, capable of cutting off airflow or increasing pressure. This isn't rumor. It's documented in design blueprints and maintenance logs. To prevent communication through vents, air ducts are soundproof and airflow can be reduced at will. Some inmates claim the sound of the ventilation system talks to them, a rhythm that speeds up when they speak, slows when they're quiet. Psychologists say it's hallucination, but in Florence, hallucinations can be proven wrong. because there's no one left to answer you. The ghost shift. Inside ADX, there's a shift no one talks about, the ghost shift. Between 2 and 4 a.m., the prison enters a strange silence. Guards move slower, lights dim slightly, and the hum of machinery dominates everything. It's during this time that officers conduct wellness checks, silent inspections through small cell slots. No talking, no acknowledgement, just observation. Some inmates describe waking to find eyes staring through the slot. Others say they never see anyone, just feel watched. For those who survive long enough inside, time itself breaks apart. You stop knowing when you're being watched, because the answer is always the lawsuit they tried to bury. The Cunningham lawsuit was a turning point. Filed by mentally ill inmates, it accused the Bureau of running a facility that knowingly caused psychosis, self-harm, and death. In 2015, the Bureau settled, quietly. They agreed to improve mental health care, expand step-down programs, and monitor isolation more closely. But the settlement came with no admission of wrongdoing. And within a year, little had changed. For every new psychologist hired, dozens of inmates remained untreated. For every reform promised, another man fell deeper into silence. ADX didn't evolve. It adapted, learning how to look humane while remaining unbreakable. The invisible architects who built ADX Florence. Not just the architects who poured the concrete, but the thinkers who designed the philosophy behind it. Names like Marion S. Barry, Norm Carlson, and John Clark. Officials who saw prisons as living laboratories for order. Their memos spoke of behavioral modification through isolation. Their legacy? A blueprint replicated from Florence to federal systems across the nation. And just like the prisoners inside, these architects have mostly vanished from public view, their influence hidden in policy papers, their designs living on in steel and silence. When walls remember, every wall tells a story. But in ADX Florence, the stories are trapped, vibrating inside reinforced stone. The screams fade, the footsteps stop, but energy remains. Guards say some nights, you can hear faint murmurs in the empty corridors, voices that shouldn't exist. Rational minds call it memory. But in a place built entirely on silence, even echoes become company. ADX Florence isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by design. The human experiment. Inside ADX Florence, there's a phrase whispered among both inmates and staff. This place doesn't punish the body. It punishes the mind. Welcome to the human experiment in solitude. Each prisoner here is locked away for 23 hours a day in a 12 by 7 foot cell. No physical contact. No communal yard. No human voice unless it's muffled through layers of steel and reinforced glass. For decades, psychologists and human rights observers have called it clean torture. No bruises, no visible scars, just erasure. The architects who designed this facility understood something most prisons never dared to implement, a mathematical approach to isolation. Every door, every corridor, every vent is placed to prevent human connection. If two prisoners shout through their doors, the sound bounces through acoustic traps, swallowed before it reaches the next cell. If an inmate wants to see the sky, he can't. The recreation yard is outdoors, yes, but the ceiling is covered with tight steel mesh. You can only see slivers of blue, like looking at freedom through a cage. It's architecture as a weapon. A former guard once said, "You don't hear noise in ADX. You hear absence." That's what makes it scary. Inside their cells, inmates invent ways to measure time. Some count cracks in the wall. Others repeat daily patterns just to keep their minds intact. Push-ups, pacing, talking to imaginary people through the vent. One former inmate confessed after his release, "I used to talk to the sink. I gave it a name. It was the only thing that didn't ignore me." What happens to a mind when you strip it of all sensory input? When you never see a tree or touch another person for years? In ADX, that's not an accident. That's the point. Psychologists at ADX, many have spent 15 years or more in that same state. The architects might not have intended it as cruelty, but their design became a laboratory, a test of human endurance. And many failed. Inmates like Thomas Silverstein, once labeled the most dangerous man in the Bureau of Prisons, spent 36 years in continuous isolation. He wrote, "It's like living in a tomb. You wake up and realize you're still buried alive. But even in this abyss, there are moments, fleeting, fragile, when humanity breaks through. A laugh through the vent, a bird that lands near the yard cage, a letter from a stranger who remembers your name." ADX was built to erase man. Yet somehow, even here, memory resists. The question now isn't what ADX Florence does to criminals. It's what ADX Florence says about us, about a society that engineered perfect isolation. And somewhere behind those walls, even the architects themselves began to wonder, had they built a prison or something far darker? ADX Florence is more than a prison. It's a monument to control, a laboratory for isolation, and a testament to the extremes of human endurance. Inside these walls, time stretches, minds bend, and silence becomes a weapon. But the story doesn't end here. The echoes of this fortress reach far beyond Colorado, into policies, prisons, and even minds around the world. If this journey into the shadows of ADX left you unsettled or fascinated, don't forget to like this video, share it with those who want to see the hidden truths behind the walls, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world of crime, punishment, and the minds behind them. Because the next story, the next descent into the unseen corners of the criminal world, could be even darker.